Good morning, everyone. Excuse my attire. I am at my horse farm right now. But I wanted to introduce our amazing guest speakers today, Rachel and Adam and Brian. They are a huge resource to us here in Philadelphia. Anyone that has any questions relating to real estate, zoning, variance, city certs, these are the most important people you should have in your Rolodex. They are so generous and so kind to share their knowledge and time with us today. So I will let you guys take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thanks for having us. And also we have Scott Woodruff as well, who's the Director of Architecture for Design Blends. And our law firm, Pritzker Law Group, and Design Blends work a lot together on a variety of projects. So we're happy that you included us in this, and we hope you guys find a lot of value from the presentation. So I think Brian will start, and then we'll be open up for any questions towards the end.
Yeah, cool. Let me just share my screen here. Can everyone see the presentation? Cool. So I guess, Rachel, we'll just do quick intros of what we do. Do you want to start since your name's first on here?
Yeah, so we're Pritzker Law Group. Adam and I are twins, and we run a full-service real estate law firm focused in the areas of real estate development, government relations. We do a lot of work with all the city agencies. We do a lot of zoning variance work, and really are just a resource for individuals, developers, investors who are looking for legal services and litigation services related to real estate and development.
Great. So I'll start. I'm Brian Corcadelis. I'm the CEO of Design Blends. Just to let everyone know, Pritzker and us, we've been teaming up now for the past 6 weeks on doing a 2 p.m. presentation every Thursday. Last Thursday we did this presentation, and we're asked to come do it today for everyone here. Tomorrow, actually at 2 p.m., we're going to be having on former Mayor John F. Street. So if you're interested, just reach out. We do it also on Facebook Live at 2 o'clock every Thursday. And he's going to be speaking on the city and his thoughts on what's going on at the moment. Just to give you a quick sense of what Design Blends does, we have 30 people that are currently working from home, and I know everyone's experiencing that right now. We handle everything relating to architecture, from single-family homes to big multifamily sites across the city. We have a 3D visualization and rendering team in-house that helps pre-market and pre-sell real estate before it's built. And we actually do a lot of work with KW throughout the city. And then we also have a general contracting firm. So we're building anything from 1 to 20 units, ground up new construction around the city at the moment. And also Scott's here too. He's our Director of Architecture. So everything relating to architecture, him and his team have been responsible for. Last year, they were responsible for 1 out of every 18 new construction permits approved in the city of Philadelphia. So don't ask me, ask the expert Scott here. But yeah, they kind of know what they're doing at this point. So cool. I guess we'll just get into it.
So this was from our update from last week. Ad, do you want to just?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, sure thing. So basically the big news last week coming into, this week was that the construction curfew was lifted. So before that, there were limitations to when you could work. It was like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. and not the weekend. So now they're allowing basically to be back on a regular schedule, which includes the weekends. The only carve out was that you're not allowed to work on 1 to 2 family construction within, those curfews are still there for that type. We're also, monitoring a lot of our clients from both sides are, obviously monitoring this issue with the legislation right now, which is that, any permits that were issued after March 20th, you still cannot work on those projects. So it's really anything before that you're now allowed to work on with, there are other conditions such as, not being able to work on things that are next to adjacent occupied structures, which is a lot of this city. Obviously everybody in this group is going to know that, there was a pretty big deal, limited scope legislation passed yesterday, allowing, us real estate professionals to start doing our jobs again in some capacity. So big deal for everybody in here. And I think that will be great and can be done from, effective healthcare perspectives. So, the other thing that we know about, and again, these are all updates that are pretty still spot on, the ZBA, the CDR review panels, they're working on getting operational, but there's nothing yet to be really expanded on that. They may be expanding, when I say they may be, the city of Philadelphia may be expanding the definition of emergency repairs to include MEP sprinkler fire alarm systems. Again, I just mentioned there's still no movement as to if you're allowed to work on things that require underpinning, or if you're doing some demolition work against occupied attached structures adjacent. And then OPA is still closed. It's a huge issue, but what we're telling our clients is you're not going to be penalized for anything that the OPA is working on their end from a systematic standpoint. So please tell your clients, keep their abatement paperwork, do not send it in, because it's just going to sit in a pile and likely, get lost. So again, they won't be penalized. They don't have to worry. They'll figure out how to refund you appropriately.
All right. Types of permits. So just today, one of the pieces we're reviewing here are the types of permits that are most common in the city. The three we're going to chat about today are zoning, building, and right-of-way permit. Obviously, there's some other permits in the city: demolition permit, make safe permits, sign permits, temporary use permits, and the list goes on. But the three most important that we deal with on a daily basis are the top three there, and we'll get into those in a second. So without further ado, I guess Scott, you're gonna chat on zoning permits.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is meant to be a little bit more general, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of things too. And if you have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can kind of address any specific questions that you have at the end as well. So zoning permits, when do you need them? Any new buildings, new construction, additions in any building size. So any sort of roof deck, fence, any sort of those things also count. Anytime you're changing the use in a building. So let's say you have a building that used to be an industrial warehouse, you're trying to make a bunch of offices in it, it would technically need a zoning permit to change that use within the building. And one that people don't always know is any new parking spot needs to be run through zoning. So there's certain stipulations in the zoning code that either prohibits parking spaces in areas or requires screening or different requirements for any new parking spot. So anything that has to do with that needs to also go through the zoning process. Just real brief requirements for zoning documents. Usually there's a zoning drawing that's required, that's provided by either your architect or engineer. Any kind of design professional can produce that drawing. Proof of ownership is something that is usually required as well. Usually if there's a change, you're going to make sure you show that. Usually that's done through a recorded deed or your HUD-1 settlement sheet. If it's the same owner, you obviously don't need that. And then there's multiple prerequisite approvals depending on what you really are proposing and where your lot is located. And those include streets, PWD, Planning Commission, Art Commission, Survey District, OPA. Any one of those could be triggered for various things, which we'll get into later. Building permits, pretty simple types of building permits. Obviously new construction, there's an addition alteration permit, and then a certificate of occupancy permit. Those are the three really types of building permits. I will say the one thing that some people don't realize, and that is very important, is that your zoning permit type needs to match your building permit type. So if you get a zoning permit that is for an addition alteration permit, your building permit also needs to be addition or alteration permit. That's something that trips up a lot of people, but you just need to make sure that those match and what you're proposing in zoning is matching whatever the building is as well. Or you have to go back to the beginning, which is not fun. Requirements, architectural drawings provided by your design professional, structural if required, obviously, as well. All needs to be just by a registered architect within PA. And then we have a litany of forms that are required for a building permit, energy compliance forms, special inspection forms and agencies. Your approved zoning permit needs to be within that submission, structural design criteria, waste hauler form, proof of ownership. And then any prerequisite after that, that is also required. So, we used to have these huge stacks of paper that used to go down to the city, with all these forms, and we needed 3 copies. Now we're all digital, which is nice. So we at least are saving the trees a little bit and not printing so much.
And then the types of prerequisites to the permits, right? This is the start to being able to do the permits. Yeah,
and this is usually the part that trips up most people. The permits are fairly straightforward on what you need, but depending on what scenario or what you're proposing, there are all of these other agencies that don't talk together that you need to factor in their timelines for. Streets and PWD are the 2 main ones that are really almost required on every single project. And there's varying degrees to what prerequisite approval that you really need. Again, very dependent on what you're actually proposing. So streets approvals are required at any encroachment of construction within the right of way. So any steps, egress wells, bay projections, balconies, anything that crosses that property line into the sidewalk is going to need a level of streets review and approval to it, which is important to know because they have their own codes and stipulations and things around that, which your design professional should be aware of what those are. And those are just a quick list of the different streets approvals: checklist 1, checklist 2, ADA ramp approvals. You can get into PennDOT highway occupancy permit approvals as well. It kind of goes in list of the more intensive review, which obviously accounts to time and money, as we all know, with how much we have to do. Philadelphia Water Department is required for all new constructions or any new utility service. So if you're doing an addition or renovation and you're bringing a new sprinkler line or you're bringing a new water line, you're gonna have to go through a level of Philadelphia Water Department approval, which usually includes a utility plan and an Act 537 approval, again, which your civil engineer or your architect should be able to kind of assist through. But it's important that those things get done before the building permit, so you don't find that out at the end and then have to wait, a good month or month and a half to get those things within there. Your RSA approvals and stormwater technical approvals kind of get tied in with green roof approvals as well. So anything with stormwater management is going to be provided by your civil engineer who's on your project team. And those reviews kind of are varying as well. So the first one's the preliminary ERSA, and then you could possibly get into a stormwater approval, which is almost the same as the green roof approval if you are going for that green roof bonus as well.
Typically get the question like, what's required for my project? The bigger the project, the more requirements.
Fair point. I think that's a good pro tip. I think another, like the pro tip that we have on here that, we'll just cover it now because it's going to relate to everything else we talk about is, the city sees you building as a privilege. And if you haven't paid your taxes, they don't allow you the privilege to get, your building permits, any of these approvals. So right now that's been a little bit more difficult. We've, all been helping our clients figure out ways to, get kind of like temporary approvals. If it's something you really can't work on, it's pretty small. It's not affecting moving forward. The only thing that's being affected is that your ability to actually resolve either some sort of small violation or kind of maybe you have a waiver for some tax interest. So big thing is you need that tax clearance, and believe it or not, that that comes up quite a bit. So because people just don't know where they're at with that stuff. They think they're updated or not. So again, need the tax clearance to get through all this stuff.
Great. And then more prerequisites.
They just keep coming, Brian. They just keep coming. These are the less common ones, but you also you get these triggered also mainly on corner properties and larger, more complicated projects within the city. Planning Commission approvals for any corner properties, they need to be go over a counter review, surface parking, lot line relocations, conservation overlays. Usually they're pretty quick, pretty painless. It's just kind of a necessary step and a stamp that you need to get throughout the process. And then there's the CDR review, which Planning Commission also controls, which is, I'm sure you're all aware of, the more intensive review that's on a public forum that they get before any zoning approvals happen within projects that are over 50 units or 50,000 gross square foot increases. Survey district approvals are required by the Planning Commission for lot line relocations. So that is a prerequisite to the prerequisite, which is always fun. But your civil engineer is usually very aware of those things during lot line relocations and subdivisions, and usually handle that before they give you any of the plans, which is great. It's just good to make sure that you're aware of it for your timelines. Historic approvals is pretty straightforward. Any overlay or designated building needs to go through a level of historical approval. And that's typically found out at the beginning of the project. You kind of contact them. They'll tell you what level of review they most likely will require. You always want to push for a staff review because you don't have to go to the commission and sit in multiple meetings in a public forum. Usually if you can just work with the staff to kind of make sure that the project is to their liking, that is always preferred. Fairmont Park Commission is required for subdivisions or 3 or more properties, and that's for street tree approvals. So Fairmont Park Commission controls all the street trees that go into the sidewalk, the types of trees, their locations. Our commission required for any public art or signs. And then OPA approvals are required for the subdivisions and consolidations. And basically that's for the addresses. So after you get your zoning permit with your new lot lines, you have to go to the OPA. They'll give you your new OPA numbers, your tax numbers, and the new addresses that they see fit. And that also reigns true for any planned unit developments or condos. They kind of also help out with that and kind of determine the plots and plans.
Great. Moving on to licenses, certifications, and the abatement.
Yeah. So these come up a lot. Right now I'm just going to touch probably the biggest ones, and then we'll go into more detail about them. Commercial activity license. So like in most cases, you need a commercial activity license in order to have a rental or, do work in the city. There's a couple carve outs, but mostly it's really, unless it's owner occupied 2 to 4 units. So you're actually living in the property that you're renting. You're going to require a commercial activity license. And that comes with, having to sign up, your ability to sign up and get, your required housing rental licenses and the certificate of rental suitability, which is required for all rental units. Property sale certification. So Rachel is probably going to touch a little bit more on this, but they're usually required for the lender. So it basically certifies the last registered use of the property. So when they're looking to lend, they want to make sure that the zoning and use matches up to what you're actually going to be using the property for, that you're going to do in your plans. And then there's the property tax abatements. So, one thing people don't know is there's 3 of them. There's a development abatement. There's abatement for new construction. Within that, there's commercial and residential fall within those. And then there's an abatement for improvements, or what we like to call, rehabs on existing structures.
Rach, can you touch on the development abatement? Because, for realtors specifically, for their clients, this is like a hot abatement that most people don't know about and what it's useful for.
Sure. So there's an abatement that you can get, and you have to apply for it. And we'll talk about the deadlines for applying for it. But basically what it does is it abates up to 30 months during construction. So it will freeze the taxes as they are on the property for up to 30 months during construction. So if you have developers that are working on, phased projects where it's going to take a year, 2 years, or even if it's just going to take, a year, but you may anticipate there being some sort of a reassessment during that time, you can get this abatement, and it will freeze the taxes and keep the tax liability the same. So we'll talk about the timeline for that, but it's a really important tool that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of, and can really make it so that your carrying costs can be more easily calculated, and you can kind of lower your tax liability risk as you're developing.
Great. Cool.
So there's 3 types of abatements like we talked about. Again, the first one is the development abatement. It's for new constructions or improvements. So it's not just for new construction, it's also for improvements to real estate, or as Adam mentioned, rehabs. Basically, again, it's a 30-month abatement. It freezes the property taxes. It has to be applied for within 60 days of the building permit issuance date. The timelines of these are really the most important thing, besides understanding that they're available to you, because most people do not have accurate information on the timelines. And there's ways that your legal team can help resolve that. But again, that's probably the most important, so we don't have to get involved. Every building permit has an issuance date, top right corner, and this abatement, along with the new construction one, has to be applied for within 60 days. The abatement starts the first day of the month after the building permit is issued by L&I. The second one is probably the most common one people know about, which is the abatement for new construction. This is for industrial, commercial, and residential. It's a 10-year tax abatement for new construction. There was a change made at the end of last council session to change the 10-year tax abatement for new construction residential properties only, to reduce it to essentially a 5.5-year abatement. So it's basically where you have the full abatement for the first year, and then it gets decreased by 10% for the remaining 10 years, which boils down to a 5.5-year abatement. They're talking about extending the implementation date of that. It's not been changed as of yet, so we'll keep an eye on that. But as of right now, residential new construction, you can basically get a 5.5-year abatement if you submit after 12/31/2020. Again, we're keeping an eye on that. The filing time within 60 days of the building permit issuance date, and the abatement starts January 1st after certification that the improvements are complete. It's important to note for all these abatements that you want to make sure that you're accurately reflecting the cost of construction when you submit your building permit application, because they do abate the cost of construction, the amount of the improvements. So, there's ways that we can work with you and your team in the event that there's change orders, or you add value later on, or a wall has to come down that you didn't think had to come down. But just keep that in mind, because that's the best way for OPA to certify the cost of your construction. The third one is the abatement for improvements to existing structures. We get a lot of questions about this. People said, oh, I thought I had to improve it about 90%, or I didn't know for a kitchen or a bathroom or a roof deck that I could get an abatement. You absolutely can. It's a 10-year tax abatement. That's not being changed by the legislation. So it's a good incentive to rehab existing structures and improve existing structures. It has a different timeline than the other 2 abatements. So the timeline for this is that it must be applied for within the same calendar year which the building permit was issued. So if your building permit was issued in 2020, this abatement application has to be submitted to OPA before 12/31/2020. It's not one full year, it's within the same calendar year. This abatement also starts January 1st after certification that improvements are complete, and you actually end up getting a final form that basically it says a certificate to commence a 10-year tax abatement. That's the last form that goes in, and that's kind of how they restructure, the tax bases as far as the revenue department and OPA are concerned. So these are the main abatements. I know that's a lot of information, and we can dive into those, but really keep in mind the timeline and making sure that your builder you're working with and your GC gets your construction costs, correct, and work with your team on that.
Yeah, and I just think to go like one quick point on that,
Sure.
what you were saying, like most people think it's like significant improvement. So, I've heard people say it has to be 75% or 90%. It's not true. We just talk about if it's going to improve the value of the home, and that's it. And again, we, typically err on the side of let's submit it. There's certain things we know, like framing, because every house needs framing. It's not going to really add to the value of the home. But, if you're putting it as small as putting a new half bath in, you should definitely submit for that abatement. You will receive it.
Yeah, the paperwork is not really arduous. So we always say to people, you'd rather just submit it and let them tell you that it doesn't qualify instead of missing an opportunity to lower your tax liability. Anytime that you can pay less taxes, you know, you should, because it's really an incentive to improve real estate. Just quick on the pro tips. We already mentioned tax clearance. Part of this 12-week process of the abatement application is they check with the revenue department that you're tax compliant. So, you know, you want to make sure that you're in good standing with them as well. Again, the final document is the certificate to commence a 10-year tax abatement, which just kind of certifies the owner's name and address, and also when the construction was complete. And then the last thing is, even though there's a longer timeline for the improvement abatement, and even though you have 60 days, you should always just get it in right away, because it takes 12 weeks to process. And so we've done a lot of work with helping people, you know, putting escrow agreements aside while things are pending. So the sooner you can get it in, the better. And it should be hand delivered to OPA, and you should get a stamped copy. Anytime you're dealing with city agencies, you'd rather be safe than sorry, just to make sure you have everything stamped and organized. It just will help you down the road in the event that something gets misplaced. So that's really these abatements and some of our pro tips.
Forms?
Yeah, these are just the forms. Adam can kind of explain.
Yeah, so really they all look the same for the first two pieces of this. The difference being that that last page is going to tell you, you know, based on if you're doing the new construction or the rehab, you know, making sure that you have the right document, because it does provide the legislation that outlines the rules, and then it basically gives you, you know, all the requirements of what you need to provide to make sure you're doing this accurately. So with all these, as Rachel mentioned, you're going to include your building permit at minimum with that. You know, we're not talking about your electric permit or anything like that. We're just simply saying, in order to qualify, you just need to present your building permit. Sometimes you can have issues between the building permit not being enough for what the construction costs you're writing in. There's some ways we know how to help that, so you don't have to go through this process altogether. But ultimately, you want your construction cost to basically match your building permit estimated costs.
Great. And what if you file late? How many people do that, Rachel?
Yeah, we get this a lot. And again, that's why I kind of emphasize the timelines. If you file late, there's a couple options. Sometimes depending on how late it is or how not late it is, if it's a couple days or weeks, you know, sometimes we just say, let's submit it and see. Sometimes they can be lenient if it's, you know, really close. Because again, they're not trying to penalize anybody. That's not the point. If you are actually late, we have to file what's called a nunc-pro-tunc to the Board of Revision of Taxes, which is an administrative board under the Office of Property Assessment. Basically, you have to explain to them why you were late, what the circumstances were, and really time is of the essence. So if your permit was, this is 3 years, and you know you just forgot about it, that's not really a good excuse. You really want to, you know, the second you realize it, we really should have a conversation and figure it out. Again, it can take 6 months to a year to get in front of the Board of Revision of Taxes. So if you do, you really just pro tip, don't be late so that we don't have to work through this process. But, you know, we have been successful in some of these. Again, it's really case by case basis, trying to understand why you were late and again, the timing of that.
Yeah, I would say the average, you know, I think they would tell you the average success rate's under 25%. So our office does quite a bit higher, but again, that's because we know what they're going to accept and not accept. And we don't like to let people go through this process knowing that, you know, that ignorance isn't an excuse, is how they look at it basically. And so we won't take a case like that. But a lot of people come there and unfortunately waste a lot of time and money just to find out that same answer.
And we have just two quick questions while we're on this subject of abatements, because I know it's one of the most highly talked about pieces of real estate legislation in the city. Charles asked, development abatement is for 30 months, so no payment required during construction period. Does the payment accrue and is payable after 30 months?
It's not that the payment isn't required. You still have to pay your taxes on time. It's that they freeze the assessed value of it. So you're not going to see an increase in the payment if you have the development abatement. It's not that you don't have to pay your taxes. You have to pay your taxes. It's just that in the event that you're doing a project that spans over, let's say, a year, 2 years, 3 years, where there would be a reassessment, you're not going to have to worry about paying that additional assessed value. That it's just so that you can kind of, my thought about it would just be so that as far as your pro forma and your carrying costs and your financing are concerned, you don't have to draw more money or try and figure out what the increase might be. So,
and it may sound obvious. It may sound obvious, but only the builder gets that tax break. So it only lasts until the property's sold, or 30 months accrues. So you do need to, you know, kind of have that lined up. Not that we see that often, because typically we don't see the 30-month being taken into account, and more so people are worried about that 10-year tax payment. But again, it does kind of just transfer over, and that's why there's that document that you need to submit.
Yeah, and what I would mention, just because of the audience that we have on this call, is that you know, generally there's, and this is definitely a topic for another day that we should explore, but when you are doing a sale of a property and there is an assessment that is higher than either the sale price or what you think is reasonable, there's usually only one time period, which is the first Monday in October. It's either first Monday or Tuesday in October to appeal your taxes. If you guys are dealing with a client where the assessment is too high, you can, upon, you know, within 30 days of agreement of sale, appeal your taxes. So there are some other tax considerations in addition to the development abatement that you can take advantage of. But again, nothing allows you to not pay taxes.
Mm-hmm. Last question regarding the abatement. Ina asked, is this something that could be done by the owner, or do they need an attorney? I'll answer that. I've done it in person. I've gone myself. I can just promise you, if your client is doing volume, I highly recommend just getting an attorney involved so they don't miss the deadlines for you and just keep you on track. But yeah, for a one-off, an owner can go do it. You know, if you're the developer and you want to go down to the Curtis building and you know, make sure you got your forms filled out correctly. I can promise you the amount of times I've called Rachel to make sure I filled out the forms is a stupid amount. So
yeah, it's just, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's like Brian said, it's weighing, you know, what you want to do. And the fact is we've done probably 1,000 in 3 years, you know, so in the last 3 years. So like, it's just, you know, do you want to waste your time and energy trying to learn a form? You know, again, for some people like Brian, who are in development quite a bit, not that big of a deal. He chooses to go through us because it's not that big of a deal and he just doesn't want to deal with it. So,
yeah, listen, time is money, and you know, sometimes you just let people who know what they're doing do it, so you don't have to worry about it. It's not that it's overly complicated. It's just also, you know, sometimes you should just pay attention to what you're good at and let people handle it.
And OPA isn't up yet. So again, like our advice was always, we're going to hand deliver it. I mean, so that's what we, you know, that's our best practices. We would recommend that to anybody doing it themselves. We'll see how that shakes out, but OPA is still not yet online and not through the Eclipse system. So
just to quickly,
right now, just hold on to it.
And just to quickly skim through the rest, because I know we're getting tight on time. People will ask, you know, if I pull a new building permit, if I forgot the abatement application and it passed, if I pull a new building permit, can I now apply under that permit? The short answer is no. They have it in their system, so they'll look at what your original permit was and they'll see that you're late. If you made changes, or say for example, it was you bought it from someone, it was a different contractor, now it might give us an easier time getting relief through the appeal process. And again, if you made changes to it and you added something on, certainly you should submit the new building permit, say a year later, 2 years later, you did something else. But again, they are going to look at the original permit. And again, a lot of this should just be really assessed case by case. There are two other quick options. I mentioned the tax appeal and then the homestead exemption. If it's a owner occupied and you live in the city of Philadelphia and you're buying a home, and you're not qualified for the abatement, you can get the homestead exemption, which reduces your property tax assessment by $45,000, which essentially works out to like $650 a year. So there are some other options to help reduce your tax liability.
Rental licenses.
Sure. So housing rental licenses, we get asked about a lot. Every landlord needs to obtain a housing rental license when renting units. It needs to be renewed annually. It's not something that automatically renews. This is all done on the Eclipse system, which we're going to get into. You need a commercial activity license and a BERT number to do business in the city of Philadelphia. There's exemptions, of course. If you have 2 to 4 units and one is owner occupied, you don't need a commercial activity license. There's a separate application, which is a 2 to 4 unit owner occupied housing rental license. Some of the prerequisites, again, tax compliancy. You need zoning approval. So if you have an approval for 3 units, you need a rental license for the 3 units. We've had times where the permit will say 3 units, the rental license will say 4. Everything has to match up. Again, we talked about commercial activity license. You have to have a certificate of occupancy as well. That's not, you don't need a CO for a change of ownership, but you do need a CO for a change of use or an alteration to an existing structure. Again, a new owner alone doesn't trigger it. You know, we sometimes just bring down the settlement sheet or the new deed in the event of a new owner. Other documents, Adam talked about the certificate of rental suitability. It comes with the housing rental license. It's issued by L&I no later than 60 days before the start of the lease. All of this should be provided to your tenants. There's also a lead-based paint certification for properties that meet those 2 requirements you see there. Smoking disclosure as well, and a Partners in Good Housing guidebook. All this has to be provided to your tenant. Why? Because in the event that you have to go to landlord-tenant court, and you are owed arrears in rent, if you don't have clean hands in the sense of having the required licenses that you're supposed to have, you're going to have a hard time getting the judge to award you any of the arrears that are owed to you. Again, you can remedy that at any time by going to get it if you don't have it. But again, those are sort of the consequences of it. Last is Airbnb. That's a completely separate use classification, separate licensing, and for another day. I think given what's going on with the pandemic, we're seeing a lot less of that, but if anyone has those kind of questions, we can talk about that at another time.
Property sales certifications. What is that?
So property sales certs, and we get asked this a lot. It basically shows, it has the City of Philadelphia certifying what the most recent registered use is. It's also pulled through the Eclipse system. You can get it automatically. Adam pulls them for us all the time. A lot of times lenders, again, want to see that the property can be used in the way in which they're lending money for, so that they can make sure that there's no issue down the road with the money and the financing. A lot of people will say, well, can I get a use permit? You can get a use permit, but sometimes, for example, for existing non-conforming uses, for example, property has a base zoning of RSA 5, which is single family, but it's been a long-standing triplex since 1956. The permit is from 1956, but it's been in continuous use. If you went to apply for a 2020 use permit, you might generate a refusal because it's now zoned for single family. But if you got a property sales certification from the city, it would show the last registered use was a triplex, and that you could provide for lending. So it's another way to have this, and it's from the city. So it's another way to really certify that you have that. The other main things worth noting is that for vacant property licenses or vacant structures, they wipe out all uses that were approved prior to that permit being on your file. So for example, if you have this single family lot, RSA 5 base zoning district, but you have an existing triplex, if you then, the city comes and sees that it's been vacant, you know, or you demo it and now it's now a vacant lot, there's no use on it. So you have to then go reapply. You know, and again, for vacant lots, there's no use on a vacant lot besides it's a vacant lot. You have to then have your design professional, your architect, draw up plans and submit plans to the city to be able to have a use on it. You can't just apply without plans to kind of lock in a use. So that's really important. We get a lot of people who say, oh, my lot's RM1, can I go get a permit for 4 units? Sure, but you need to get an architect and submit plans. Existing structures, it's a little bit different, but you know, that's important to keep in mind as well.
Great. Getting into Eclipse. So I'm assuming everyone here has heard about the Eclipse system or might know that it exists. You know, one of the questions we get asked now is, you know, can I submit building permits? You know, with the city shut down, the answer is absolutely. The system is working. And, you know, I think, Scott, you want to dive into, you know, kind of maybe what your team's been doing and what's going on with the city and how it relates to the Eclipse system?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to briefly go over this. Eclipse is the digital submission for all licensing and permits from Philadelphia. When they rolled this out, just as the pandemic was going on, the intention was not to have building permits and zoning permits through this. With this situation, they've upgraded everything and they're pushing their timelines ahead. There's about 85% capabilities on through Eclipse right now. The agencies that aren't on Eclipse are Historic Commission, Survey Districts, OPA, and Planning Commission. Planning Commission is most likely going to come back online or try and get integrated sooner rather than later. I don't see OPA or survey districts coming into this for quite some time. So basically that kind of means like any sort of lot line relocation, subdivision is still kind of done through paper or email, and most likely is going to get held up at some point within submission. The rest of these submissions through Eclipse though, building, zoning, are moving. They're moving fairly well, which is great. They've turned off any accelerator reviews through Eclipse right now, but everything is on a 10-day review time. So things that we've seen go in through Eclipse has been moving fairly rapidly. All the payments are through online. All the approval stamps kind of come online. There's some specific requirements that your design professional and you should just be aware about. Brian, from the next slide.
Yep.
For submitting through Eclipse. Oh yeah, there you go. And one of the big questions too is, who can use the Eclipse system? Design professionals, business owners, legal professionals, expediters, contractors. This is why that activity license is so important that we were talking about, it seems like on almost on every slide here. You have to have that to get into Eclipse. It's a little bit of a pain to kind of get through that process to get in. But it's that extra level of verification that your contractor, design professional, yourself, everyone's tax compliant, everyone's got all the right things that are filed with the city that sometimes before weren't necessarily the case. But it's really making sure that, everyone's up to snuff kind of going forward when we submit.
I can say from the general contracting side, there's been some delays, specifically with the tax clearance and activity licenses for the right subcontractors. So now the city's requiring, if I'm the general contractor and I pull a building permit and I now need my electrician, my plumber, my HVAC guy, subcontractors, they need to go and link into my project within Eclipse to pull their permits. So you might see some delays with some building where some of these subcontractors, not only were they shut down for 60 days and trying to get back going, but now they're having to deal with this Eclipse system and get compliant through it. So we've personally seen some delays on that, but people are moving forward, but it's just something that, be, realistic with timeframes moving forward.
And I think good and bad, because now you're able to actually see when you link up, we're able to have a next layer of communication, seeing when things are getting issued. There's kind of no more having to dig in and really ask people. It's right there for you. But again, like you said, you're now, at the mercy of other people getting their stuff together.
Yep. Great.
Yeah, just a quick pro tip. You can associate any of these permits with other professionals within Eclipse. So, projects that we work with, Adam and Rachel with, we associate those permits. They can see kind of the status of everything, and it kind of shows up on their dashboard, which is really nice as well. So again, just adding to that extra level of communication. This is just a quick list. We're on 2 slides here on different things that are required with Eclipse that weren't required before. And we went through the permit requirements earlier, because the same requirements that were for hard copies are for Eclipse. There's no difference in what you have to do. Some of it's just in the delivery, and there's some additional things that are a little bit different with submitting it yourself through this digital platform. Legacy permits are a big thing too. They can be linked in Eclipse. So basically what that means is any permit that was submitted or was in process prior to Eclipse can be linked over to your account. So if you submitted a permit and,
Nope. Did we lose Scott?
Yeah, we can add on to that. So if there was something submitted previously to Eclipse,
but you obviously can't see.
Oh, he's back. I just let him know his internet is
okay. Yeah. So if there's anything that is submitted previously, basically the only thing to be careful of is that you use the correct email that you had used when your when you had issued your permit was issued previously, or it can, get linked up possibly to the wrong places.
Exactly.
Scott, I'll let you take it.
Well said, Adam. Well said.
Thank you.
Just running down through these other ones, PA one call number is something that's typically required, but sometimes is missed. People don't know about. 100% required for new submissions. And this is really the big one that's different for us, and I'm sure is going to start to trigger a lot of other people that are submitting this. Is any residential permit, 1 or 2 family dwellings. There's a next level of detail that's required in the submission. So if you have a contractor or a design professional, or you're trying to submit yourself, just want to be aware that there are a lot of questions in there that are probably non-typical from a typical submission. A lot of those include specific plumbing fixtures that are required, electrical services, mechanical diffusers, a lot of nitty-gritty things that are required for you to kind of put in there.
It's separating, the people that are doing and the people that aren't. It's making sure that your design professional has all that stuff. You used to be able to get away with not submitting it and not filling out the correct information, but that's not the case anymore. They want to know down to every cost. It used to be able to just submit, hey, my new building's going to cost me $300,000, to build. Well, that's okay, but now they want to know what it's going to cost your HVAC system, your electrical system, your plumbing system, which is, they're making sure that everyone is not cutting corners anymore. So.
And again, with the special inspection agencies, this is kind of similar to the trade professionals. So any special inspection agency is also going to be linked in Eclipse. So the system's going to verify that they're registered, they can perform those, they're tax compliant. All of those things need to be done and registered with that agency. And any special inspection, for people that don't know, are usually third-party inspections performed by registered engineers. So usually in a new construction, you have like rebar for foundations and concrete. Sometimes like if you have steel beams and welding, those are inspections that are required by the city to be performed by an actual engineer.
And then I think we're getting close to the end, but.
Yes, some new information that's now needed. I'll just cover the ZBA. Appeals to the ZBA can be filed on Eclipse. Again, make sure that you're associated with your design professional or, anyone else who's submitting the initial application. You can submit your appeal in Eclipse. However, you need to make sure you have the same prerequisite documents that you needed to have originally either mailed in or hand delivered to the Zoning Board of Adjustment before. That's still required. Although they're not being currently processed, they are accepting them accelerated and they are taking your money, but they're not processing them or scheduling hearings right now. So, keep that in mind. I think maybe it's worth getting in the queue, but again, they're not being processed, at the moment, but they do have that feature, which is nice.
Just minor, few things to note. You have to know your level of earth disturbance now in your project. So, are you disturbing 900 square feet of earth? Are you disturbing the whole site? So that's a part of it. Also, the architectural drawings now, when you submit, need to be broken down differently. It's not just you submit one PDF document. Your G sheets, your A sheets, and your S sheets for structural need to all be uploaded separately and contain digital stamps. And I think we have Scott put on here just the new box that they're requiring. So the city now made every design professional change the way their architectural sheets lay out for digital submission. And this is where the city's supposed to digitally stamp all of your drawings. What's funny, I still think we should put the slide in here, but the street stamp doesn't fit in here. It's pretty funny. So when they stamp your drawings, it like cuts into everything else. But this is what they're requesting now. So if you get a set of drawings that your architect says, hey, I'm ready to submit for permits, and it doesn't look like this, they're lying to you. So make sure that they have a 2x5 box in the bottom left corner, or L and I will kick it back. So perfect. And I think that's it. Just summary what we chatted about today. Permit requirements, the prerequisites, and then the prerequisites to the prerequisites. Hopefully you got a sense of that. Different certifications and the 3 different abatements. housing rental licenses, property sale certifications, and hopefully an overview of the new Eclipse system to just kind of understand what's going on at the moment with that system. Also, if you have any questions, just you can start putting them in the chat. We can start answering them.
This was meant to be a rather large overview. You know, every one of those things we could probably speak on for an hour or more. So again, just wanted to hit them all because they are important.
Yep. And like I mentioned in the beginning too, if you guys want to join us tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we are, you know, having a conversation with Mayor John F. Street. So we're going to be chatting with him on the landscape of the city, you know, the current proposed budget that's open. And then we've already started generating a list of questions that people have been wanting to ask former Mayor John F. Street. And, you know, Rachel and Adam, if you want to chat, you know, obviously, you know, he's a senior advisor to
Yeah, not too much more than that, other than, you know, he's probably among, you know, people you could put on your hand that can really speak to what our current mayor is thinking at the moment and the sort of things that he's looking at and the challenges that he's facing and how Mayor Street faced them with his 30 plus years in between city council and the mayor's office.
Yep. And then there's a little survey if you want to join us tomorrow at 2 o'clock for it. Working with Mayor Street, you know, we put, you know, a little survey together, just questions. It's almost like a quiz on how much you know about the city. And we're gonna chat about it and have that conversation during the call tomorrow. So it'll be a lot of fun.
I guess if you want, can we take one question maybe?
Yeah.
If there are any, I don't know if there are.
So we got Ina here is asking another question. She said, I own a single family twin in Wisoming. Section is city 19124. It's zoned RSA 5, but I would like to remodel it into a multifamily 2 to 4 units and get a variance or change zoning to multifamily. Is this feasible / possible? How long would it take? What paperwork would I have to obtain to make it happen? And how much approximately should I expect to pay for something like this, including city fees, architectural drawings, attorney fees, etc. I'll start with the first portion just because I literally had a phone call about the exact same thing yesterday for a client. The only difference was his was CMX2 and wanted to get rid of the commercial requirement and turn it to a unit instead. One thing I can tell you right now is that the timeline for the zoning and ZBA is unknown. And that's one of the first parts to the process. You know, we can do the design, we can get, you know, the drawings done and get the zoning submitted. But once the refusal is generated, at the moment, you know, we have to then go meet with the RCO and then go to the ZBA. Well, right now, you know, one of the requirements to meet with the ZBA is having to first meet with the RCO. And some RCOs aren't meeting, some are trying to meet digitally. So, you know, that's kind of my thing. I'm just being transparent with clients and saying it's kind of unknown at that point of the process at the moment for any variance related work.
Yeah, I think Rachel, you might just want to say, you know, I think this, because it's so specific, it might be best answered, you know, if you'll email Rachel. We do feasibility studies all the time, depending on the length. So if you need, you know, if you want us to tell you basically how we see this and, you know, how it could happen, what the cost might be, it's actually something we do all the time for clients. But Rachel can surely help you out if you'll email her on that. I know she'll probably mention that.
I would just set up a call with us to discuss it. I think everything's case by case. So I won't, you know, don't want to spend other people's time going through your case in particular, but I have my email there. It's rachel@pritzkerlg.com. You can email me and we can find a time this week to chat and go over it and talk through cost and feasibility and time and all of that.
Yep.
Any other questions at the moment? No? Okay.
Yeah, and guys, we're meant to be a resource, you know, so if there are stuff, reach out specifically. Don't reach out to me about architecture. I'll let Scott take that.
Oh, I just threw Scott and I's email in there.
Perfect.
Questions too. Great. Well, hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow at 2 o'clock for a conversation with Mayor Street. Like I said, you know, reach out via email. You know, we're around. We're here as a resource. Everyone's currently working remote, so you know those 2 a.m. questions also might get answered as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.